Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Future Ready Leadership episode. And in today's episode, we're going to be highlighting some of the best clips, some of the most interesting segments from the first quarter of 2025. And we're going to start off with Martin Ford. He's a futurist and a best-selling author. And with AI advancing at breakneck speed, a lot of people are trying to figure out, what does this mean for your job, your company, and the way we work? Martin Ford is one of the world's top futurists. And in this clip, he's going to break down the rapid rise of AI and how it's shaking up the job market. Specifically, he will reveal why white-collar jobs might vanish before blue-collar ones. We're also going to talk about how AI agents are quietly becoming our new coworkers, why leaders need to embrace this shift instead of fearing it, and several other things as well. We're also going to dive into the strategies that every leader needs to stay ahead, including how to balance human talent with AI's growing capabilities, why hybrid teams are the future, and what to do now to prepare for the massive workplace changes that are on the horizon. Enjoy this episode with Martin Ford. Where do you think we are in terms of implementation and adoption of AI? So one of the things, for example, that I run, I have a CHRO group called Future of Work Leaders, and we have around 40 chief human resource officers from some of the world's top companies in there. And I'm always asking them, are you using AI internally? How are you thinking about it? And by far, the most common response I get from everybody is, well, we're kind of testing it around here and there. We're cautiously optimistic. We don't want to rely on AI completely to help us make hiring decisions, to help us predict who's going to be successful in a role, right? I hear good stories and I hear bad stories because just a lot of people don't understand how AI is making certain decisions. So I think on the adoption level, we're still very, very nascent, right? I mean, using AI or something like ChatGPT to maybe help write a job description or to help answer a question. But as far as really on the predictive side or on really making an impact in the workforce, I think we're still super, super early and really not tapping into it at all. And I think part of it is what you alluded to earlier is a level of comfort, a level of trust. If AI makes a mistake, do we understand why it made that mistake? How is it making decisions? What data is it looking at? Does it have all the right data? Is the data accurate in real time? So where do you think we are on that implementation and use level versus the actual capability of AI?
No, I think you're right that we're definitely, very early in the sort of the adaptation, the assimilation stage. It definitely will take organizations time to figure out how to deploy this technology, how to reorganize their organizations in a way that they can leverage it. But this is true of every technology. I mean, one of the comparisons that's often made is between AI and electricity, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I've heard that one.
make that comparison myself in my most recent book. It is almost, in terms of the potential impact, the breadth and scale of the technology, is almost going to be like electricity. But if you go back and look at the history of technology, I mean, it took a long time before we figured out how to really use electricity in factories and so forth. I mean, the classic example that's often given is that before electricity, of course, it was steam power, right? We used factories had a big steam engine, and all the machinery was arranged around this big steam engine, and there are all these pulleys and levers and everything attached to this steam engine that powered all of the machinery. And often factories were several stories tall because they had to be, basically arranged around this big central power system. And when electricity first came along, what they did is they got rid of the steam engine and they replaced it with a big, electric motor that powered everything in the same way. And they didn't really see much of an advantage there. Eventually, they figured out that the way to do it is to put basically an electric motor on each piece of machinery, right, and have it all each machine individually powered. And then that's why you saw factories sort of shift to the current format, which tends to be a big one-story building that takes up a lot of space with all of these individual machines spread around that are powered by electricity. But it actually took decades for them to figure out how to make that shift in order to really leverage this new resource. I don't think it would take decades in the case of AI. I think it's going to move faster,
Yeah.
but it definitely will take some time. For example, if you're thinking specifically about using artificial intelligence to replace jobs, right, to do things that used to be done by people, I think it's very rarely going to be a one-to-one correspondence where there's one worker doing some stuff now, and then there's going to be an AI system or maybe someday a robot that comes and does exactly what that worker does. In fact, what's going to happen is that some of the tasks, the individual, things that are being done by a worker will be able to be done by AI, and those things will be replaced. And so the definition of the job will shift, right? And
Yeah.
maybe where there were two workers doing a job, and now half of what each of those workers are doing will be automated, and the job will be redefined to do all the stuff that can't be automated. But maybe then there's only one job, right? So it'll be that kind of thing, which requires really, reorganizing the whole workplace, the whole way the system works, and often probably eliminating a lot of jobs, but also creating entirely new jobs that might even be filled by entirely different workers with different skills, right?
Mm.
And my thesis though is that over time there will be fewer human workers and more AI,
Yeah.
but it's not going to be a simple progression of just bringing in robots and getting rid
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah. I guess the challenge with the electricity analogy is kind of like electricity is just kind of a I don't know the infrastructure supporting mechanism. It's kind of like what's in the background, whereas AI is actually doing the work now. And so I think that's what freaks a lot of people out is that it's probably even more impactful than electricity because it's not just a resource that powers you to be able to do something. It's actually doing the thing itself, where you no
Right,
longer
right. AI, it encapsulates intelligence, right? And that's,
exactly, yeah, 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 and
our human intelligence is our main comparative advantage, right? It's
yep.
what sets us apart from, horses and other, beasts that used to do work that have now largely been displaced, right? So once you can replace what the human brain does, then it's really hard going to be hard for people to compete. And really, we in terms of the work we do, we compete in two ways. One is our actual intellect and our creativity and our ability to think and solve problems, and the other way is that human beings are really good biological robots in terms of things like hand-eye coordination and visual perception. And so AI is ultimately going to move into both of those arenas, right?
Yeah.
Maybe first with pure AI, like what ChatGPT is doing, and then maybe followed a little bit later with robotics moving into both of those spaces. So I think that's going to be potentially enormously disruptive to the
Yeah.
job market and the economy.
Yes. So you mentioned that you think that at a certain point we're going to have a lot of displacement of jobs and we're going to have a lot more AI. So maybe we can unpack that a little bit. Can you give us an idea of timeline, what that impact is going to be? Like, what do you see happening over the next, I don't know, 3, 5, 10 years when you think about the impact of AI and also the labor force? Are we not going to have jobs? Are we just going to be on universal basic income all the time? Like, what's kind of the scenario that you see happening?
Right. In terms of the timeline, again, I definitely think we're maybe at an inflection point, right? In terms of the way things are progressing, that things from this point are definitely going to progress faster. Again, I wrote my first book raising these concerns in 2009. And at that time, I was thinking, this is going to be, 10 years, 20 years, maybe even 50 years, that kind of time frame. I think we're now at a point where, I'd be surprised if within 5 years there's not, a pretty definite impact. That doesn't mean that we're going to have mass unemployment within 5 years, but I think that there'll certainly be a lot of anecdotes that we can point to. There'll be pretty clear evidence, that AI is having an impact on the job market, and I think that will also include robotics. I mean, you know, again, I think it's going to be a while before we have something like the Optimus robot that Musk talks about that can really do lots of general purpose things. But if you, for example, look inside an Amazon warehouse,
Mm-hmm.
those are already highly automated. They still have a lot of workers because the workers are doing the things that can't yet be done by the robots.
Yep.
And those are primarily things that require, lots of visual perception and hand-eye coordination. But they're working diligently on robots that can do those things. And they're getting closer and closer. By some accounts, there are already robots out there that are, nearly at least matching human dexterity. So I think that within 5 years, you'll probably see a pretty big impact on environments like Amazon warehouses where they don't require the kind of flexibility and mobility and problem solving of, say, an electrician or a plumber. The workers in there are still doing more routine things, but they rely on dexterity. I think we could see a pretty big impact in those environments in terms of robotics. And on the white collar side, I mean, we're already seeing it with AI. And I think the impact on software development, computer coding is maybe somewhat surprisingly going to be one of the first areas where we might see that. But that will extend to all kinds of white collar jobs. I mean, already you see, specialized systems built using the LLMs like ChatGPT
Yeah.
to do things like legal activity, medical diagnosis, many different areas. So you're going to see a big impact there for sure.
Okay. All right. So around 5 years or so. And then what? So when you say big impact, are you envisioning? Are we talking like thousands, millions of jobs getting displaced? Universal basic income. Like what do you imagine the world is going to look like at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I believe it could ultimately get to the point where, it could be definitely millions, tens of millions of jobs. I mean, I would estimate probably half the jobs in the economy, at
Wow.
least, could be ultimately be displaced. I don't think that that's going to happen in 5 years. But again, it really depends on how fast these things continue to accelerate. I mean, we have seen an acceleration with these large language models, but the biggest question is whether that kind of acceleration is going to continue. There's a ongoing debate about, when is OpenAI going to release the next version of ChatGPT, the real, and obviously they've been having some, that's taking longer than some people have expected. But are we going to continue to see that kind of exponential progress? If we do, if that continues, I think there could be a dramatic impact. And what I've argued in my books is that we probably need something like a universal basic income, eventually at least, something to supplement incomes in a world where there simply aren't enough jobs to go around. I mean, I think that that's something that we may ultimately have to wrestle with.
There's also the flip side of that argument, though, right? I mean, there are some people who argue that it's not going to make a massive impact to jobs because it's going to automate some of the mundane aspects of work that we do, but it will allow us to keep our jobs, but focus more on creativity, on innovation, on strategy. Or people make the argument that we're going to create new jobs that will allow us to be creative. For example, prompt generators for ChatGPT is a new role that we're starting to creep up that seems to be paying quite well. So is it possible as well that maybe we don't have this massive impact to jobs, but then we just kind of develop new jobs that we spend more time on creativity and on innovation, and we're not going to have, kind of this scary scenario approaching us? We won't need universal basic income?
Yes, I mean, that's possible. And there's no doubt that new jobs are going to be created. The question is, will there be enough of those new jobs?
Yeah.
And secondly, will the jobs that are created be a good fit for what workers are realistically capable of, right? So if you're talking about, say, a research scientist, someone like that, I think that your argument is certainly sound. That probably AI is going to empower a research scientist, take away a lot of the mundane aspects, maybe even things like writing proposals to get research grants and stuff like that, things that scientists right now spend an enormous amount of time on. AI can probably do all of that. AI can be an extraordinarily powerful tool to propose experiments, test hypotheses, things like this. So yeah, I think if you're a research scientist or someone in a similarly creative field, it's probably all good that the AI is going to be a powerful tool that will extend your capabilities. But what if you're flipping burgers in a McDonald's, or what if you're an Uber driver and we really do have, fully functional, flexible, self-driving cars? Then maybe it becomes a little harder to see how a worker like that moves into a more creative role, right? You can see some of it, like maybe if you're an Uber driver and we have automated cars, no doubt there will be opportunities for people that sit in a control center and watch over the self-driving cars, but there can't possibly be as many of those people as there are Uber drivers, right? Because otherwise, what would be the point? There are going to be fewer of those people, and they may be more of technicians, right? They may not be enough just to know how to drive a car. So maybe those jobs aren't even going to go to former Uber drivers in most cases, right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine that progression, but it is the reality that people have different talents, right? Different capabilities. My general feeling is that at least half the people in the workforce generally come to work and they do the same kinds of things again and again, right? They do relatively routine work.
Yeah.
And the problem we're going to face is that anything that's fundamentally routine is going to get replaced by either AI or a robot at some point. And it's hard for me to see how we transition everyone into something that's fundamentally creative or non-routine, especially since the AI is also going to get better at that, right? I mean, I always say clearly the more routine jobs are going to go away, but AI is also proven to exhibit creativity, right? You can see that with just the image generation that AI can do. So I do think, and people are talking openly about the fact that we could have so-called AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence, or in other words, true human level AI. I mean, there are people like Sam Altman who just recently said he believes we know how to do it, which is an extraordinary thing to say, right? Which no one would have said, I think, even 3 years ago, right? And now he's saying we basically know how to make AGI. I don't know if that's true or not, but he's in a position to have a lot of knowledge about the progress that's being made. So there are some very smart, knowledgeable people that believe, we could be very close to building an AI system that matches human intelligence. If that happens, then
Game over.
Virtually everyone thinks that we're soon going to have super intelligence, which means that there are going to be systems out there that are smarter than any living human being, right? Smarter than Albert Einstein.
Yeah.
And once systems like that become affordable, and once they begin to animate robots and things like that, at some point it becomes hard to see who has a job anymore. Even the most capable, smartest, talented people ultimately might not be able to really compete with AI, at least in areas that are marketable, right? So I mean, it's potentially extraordinarily disruptive, but we just don't know how fast that could happen.
You are not in human resources anymore. I know your title might have human resources in it, but I can promise you, you are now moving beyond traditional HR to focus on the future of work and employee experience. And the challenge is, where do you as a CHRO go to connect with other peers just like you who are focused on that same thing? I've heard from dozens of CHROs that a lot of the communities out there are ridiculously expensive. You're spending $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. When you go to conferences, there's hundreds, if not thousands of people, and you can't really connect with CHROs. You're constantly being upsold and cross-sold. You're being subjected to speeches and just lots of fluff. That's why I put together a brand new, intimate community for CHROs limited to 100. It's called Future of Work Leaders, and you can check it out at futureofworkleaders.com. And if you're interested in moving beyond traditional HR to focus on the future of work and employee experience, and you want to connect with other peers just like you who are doing that, but who are not spending a ton of money, they're not getting upsold or cross-sold, no speeches, no fluff, none of that kind of stuff, check out futureofworkleaders.com. You'll be joining CHROs from brands like Johnson & Johnson, Neiman Marcus, Dow, Waste Management, PNC Bank, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of others. Again, futureofworkleaders.com. I can promise you, you will be glad you checked it out, and I hope to see you in there. Next up is a clip from Jordan Goldstein and Elizabeth Brink. They are the co-CEOs of Gensler. And with so much debate happening in today's world around return to office, hybrid work, this is a very, very timely segment. And they argue that the office isn't actually dead, it's evolving. And in this clip, we're going to talk about how to design a workplace where you can inspire creativity and collaboration. And as the co-CEOs of Gensler, the world's leading design firm, I thought they would be perfect to bring in to talk about some of their insights. And they've not only spearheaded some of the most iconic workplace designs in the world, but they've also championed a co-leadership model that fosters synergy and innovation. Jordan and Elizabeth are behind groundbreaking projects like Under Armour's Net Zero headquarters and several others, which you've probably seen and have been in, and maybe you even work in as well. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about why the office is still vital for culture and collaboration, how to design spaces that foster engagement and innovation, why immersive technology is no longer optional in workplace design, and we're also going to wrap up by talking about why the future of work is more exciting than ever and filled with lots of opportunities to rethink space, culture, and collaboration. When you went back to the office 5 days a week, did you get a lot of pushback from your employees? Because I'm assuming during pandemic, like most companies, you were fully remote or virtual or very much hybrid. What was your, when you told everybody you're coming back to the office, what was that like? How did you convey that? What was the messaging? Did you deal with any pushback, or was it kind of a seamless, smooth return?
Yeah, I think again, it goes to who we are as an organization, being such a deeply collaborative organization, that people really wanted to be coming together and saw the importance of that for our learning organization, for teaching, particularly some of our younger people. We had a tremendous number of people that got hired into the organization during the pandemic. And so having people together in the office, in fact, those new hires were the people that wanted to be in the office as much as possible. They wanted to really be embedded into the culture that is Gensler. That's why they come to this firm, in order to learn, to be mentored, to be a part of the culture. And so they were really driving so much of that, and the need to get them integrated and to continue building that culture of learning was really a tremendous part of why we pushed so hard to do that. And also another aspect of it that we were really focused on and really committed to was that so many of our offices are in the heart of our cities, in the heart of our downtowns, and bringing people into the office has a multiplier effect on the health of those cities and the economic vibrancy of those cities. And we're really committed to that and being an active, proactive part of the communities that we're in. And we saw how important that would be to get people back into those central business districts, being a part of that vibrant fabric of the downtown areas. And so I think a lot of our team members and our colleagues also understood that and are so committed to that. Both sides of it, the learning culture, the creative culture, and being a proactive part of our communities, that, there were a lot of champions for pushing this forward and wanting to be back in the office.
Yeah, and I would say, Jacob, there's some really great examples of projects that are coming online now that are exemplifying a lot of the things that we're talking about. I'll give you an example. Opening in January is the Under Armour headquarters.
Okay.
that we just completed, and they're a performance apparel company, and here's a building that will be coming online that is a performance building. It is a true sustainable story. It is a net zero operation building, and it's one of those buildings that for us represents everything we're talking about. Like, you walk into this building, you actually feel like you're walking into a stadium. Doesn't look like any kind of office that you've seen. What they do every day is on display. There's actually a flagship retail store that's a part of the headquarters. So those that are in there working on the next generation of product are able to see the product right there and see customers coming in and out. So they're interacting with who they're designing for. At the same time, they're dealing with athletes, and there's actually a football field and a basketball court and a track and a stadium right adjacent as part of the headquarters campus. So athletes like a Steph Curry or a football team like the University of Maryland or Notre Dame can actually come there, can actually work out there, and Under Armour is also working with them to tweak product, right there in real time. And
Hmm.
you walk into this building and you see it's not a concrete or steel building. It's a mass timber. It's a wood building. So it's sustainable that you're seeing right away. There's 3,000 plus photovoltaic solar panels on the building. So again, you're seeing the betterment that this building is creating in the environment. So from a return to work standpoint, here's a company and a building that is really taking a step forward and thinking through, what's that recipe that will draw people to that destination.
Yeah,
I
it
still want
also.
my invitation to
Yeah, I was gonna say I want to go check that
to
place
get
out.
to go do a workout
Come
there.
on down and join us.
Yeah, it reminds me, when I wrote a book in 2017 on employee experience, I talked about space, and one of the things I think it was Edgar Schein from MIT. He did research and found that the physical space kind of acts as a symbol of what your company represents.
Yes.
And so it
Yes.
seems to me that more and more organizations are realizing that, and they're using their space as kind of a symbol that represents our values, our culture, what we stand for. But then you also see some companies that are saying, well, we're getting rid of our offices and we're just going to be hybrid forever. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on, like, I'm a big believer in working in the office. I mean, I'm okay with flexible work. I think there's some value to that as well. But I'm not a huge fan of just 100% full-time remote. I think there's a lot of value in the office for leadership development, for training, for collaboration, for communication. I always give people the example of, like, if I'm giving a speech somewhere, there's a difference between me giving a speech staring into a camera versus being on a stage. I can do more of them at home staring into a camera, but they're going to be more impactful when I'm on a stage and people can see me and I can see them and you can see the full body, not just a floating head. It makes a difference. And so to the organizations out there that are, I don't know, they're considering getting rid of space or not utilizing space or not having employees back in the office, do you think that they're making a mistake or they're losing out in some areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for all the reasons you just said, for all the reasons, we talk about, space is a really important tool that can be leveraged to drive engagement, to, again, drive connection to brand and culture, to enable people to learn in different ways. I think it's an incredible learning tool as well. And particularly as so many organizations are grappling with technology. Listen, we can do all of this on the screen. We have technology tools are evolving really quickly, and I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But focusing on the humanity of the people that are doing their work, that is an equally important part. And humanity is really when we are face to face with one another. How that looks for each organization, again, it may depend a
Yeah.
little bit varied on how that looks and how they use the space and what they use the space for. But the bringing of people together is incredibly important. And we see, we're talking about workplace, but we also see that coming out of the pandemic, what people wanted to do was gather together. They wanted to have those shared experiences. It pulled people out of their homes. And one of the trends that we're really seeing in our design forecast, which we'll also probably get to, our 2025 design forecast, is the importance of these sort of mixed use urban environments that are really experientially focused. And I say that in a question about work because work is also an experientially driven at its best, it's about the experience of the employees and what that brings out of them and how that enables them to do their work. So I think that human side of us is a really important part of all of our experience, and all the spaces and places that we design should be enhancing that, whether it's a workplace, whether it's a downtown urban environment, whether it's a performance space, whether it's a sports stadium. All of that is really wrapped up into that same experience.
We really can't underestimate the power of place.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, Jacob, there is the power of being able to bring people together, to connect the dots, to find those connections and opportunities to take dialogue to the next level. And the office as a stage for that can't be underestimated.
I completely agree. I see a lot of use and value in space. Well, we talked a little bit about this trends report, so I thought maybe we could dive into that. You had 5 trends for 2025. But maybe as we go through each one, we could talk about how those are relevant to leaders of organizations, how they might be relevant for employees, because they're design trends, but I'm also really interested how those design trends are going to impact how work actually gets done. So maybe we could start off with the first one that you had on the list, which I believe was mixed use lifestyle, if I'm using that correctly.
I can dive into that first one. So it's that notion of experience-driven lifestyle districts and a heavy emphasis on experience. And this is reimagining cities with vibrant mixed-use destinations and a mix of program that connect people through a whole range of experiences. And I'll give you for example on that one. Mm-hmm. So in Nashville, there's a project called Fifth and Broadway that we did, and we share this in the design forecast. And this project is a big project. It is a mixed-use development that plugs right into the center of the city. And for those that aren't familiar with Nashville, you have this amazing street that has all the bars and restaurants on it, music, out the window at 10 in the morning. And then further up that street is an arena. And there was a part of that was disconnected. So this kind of stitches that fabric together. And it's a series of kind of architectural and urban moves that create great pedestrian pathways, mixes of uses, restaurants, retail, hospitality, office, residential, all kind of coming together in multi-levels. So it's not just kind of the horizontal connectivity, it's also the vertical connectivity. And what's amazing is that you look at it now, and it's now super successful day and night, whether there's an event going on in the arena or not. And it's pulling offices to be there. So Alliance Bernstein, for example, has a large workplace, right in this complex that is adjacent to all those different uses. So whether that's the restaurants, the live music venue that's a part of it, or the hospitality where people are coming in and visiting the organization or that are coming in for training, let's say, or meetings, it's all happening right there. And it plays up that notion that, we have talked about before in our research around this 20-minute city. That, within this radius, you can have this kind of live, work, play, and that term's been used a lot, but this is actually making it real. Mm-hmm. You can see, for instance, for Marriott International, moving there into the project we opened recently, where they moved their new headquarters into an urban environment. They're plugging right in, and they put an adjacent new hotel right next to it. And then they created a pedestrian plaza where people can gather, restaurants that are open to all. And they're plugging into the surrounding, retail and restaurants. For companies that are looking for that next generation level of energy, it also means that you can think differently about the amenities that you're bringing into your office space when you're plugging into an existing fabric of amenities that are immediately adjacent to it.
So when you think about this from like a business or a work trend, what do you think this means for the future of work? Does this mean that organizations going forward, as they think about space, that companies are not just going to have offices that are isolated and separate? They're going to be kind of embedded more into kind of, stitched into the quilt of whatever the city looks like instead of having standalone corporate offices off by themselves?
I think that is so tied into this whole idea of how are we creating experiences that compel people to do the commute, to move, go from their home and come into the office. And yes, it's a part of being part of the urban fabric. When people go into work, they want to connect with their, the people they're working with. They also want to connect to the communities that they're in and be able to do more than just the one thing. So yes, absolutely. Being a part of that stitched in quilt is a key part of work. And it's what again makes that vibrant city. It's going to drive more retail, better retail. It's going to drive more interesting restaurants in the area. It's also going to drive, more interesting, immersive experiences when people are working and they want to come out and do something fun with their colleagues or
Yeah.
meet their families after work. All of that is what really is the richness of the urban environment, the 20-minute city that we were just talking about. All of it really connects together. And these are the neighborhoods where there is where vacancy is low in office buildings, where those top buildings are really in very high demand in areas like this. So it's really playing out.
Next up, we have Sahil Bloom. He's the author of The 5 Types of Wealth and also the creator of the Curiosity Chronicle newsletter. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about a fresh way to think about success by focusing on 5 types of wealth. I thought this was a great way to continue into 2025 because so many people are trying to balance personal success with professional success. And so Sahil challenges us to think about wealth slightly differently. We're going to explore how to connect your work to your purpose, how to overcome the trap of overthinking, and how to use simple frameworks to build deeper connections and more meaningful progress. We're going to unpack his insights, including why chasing money without purpose leads to burnout, how to build what he calls social wealth to combat the loneliness epidemic. We're also going to look at the power of questioning cultural norms to find your identity and how even small actions can create massive compounding effects in life. Enjoy this clip with Sahil Bloom. So let's unpack your 5 types of wealth a little bit.
We can start at the top. Let's
which
start
one
with
do you want to
time.
start with? Okay. So time, this is a lot of people struggle with this. Sometimes I struggle with this as well. Maybe even you do as well, right? Especially when you're building your own business. But I guess it's one thing when you control your time, when you work for yourself, versus if you work at a company and maybe a lot of people say, well, Sahil, that's great. I can't control my time. My boss controls my time. I have to show up to work. I'm working from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. What do you want me to do?
I think a good way to go through this, by the way, would be with each one, let's just talk through one of the kind of tactics that I talk about in the book. So in each section of the book, there is sort of the theory around it and storytelling around it. And then there's a guide for actually building this type of wealth in your life. It might be a fun way to go through it to sort of tease each one tactic around each that people can take away from this and start going and acting on. And obviously go deeper on it by reading the book. So with time, you always have control over your energy. And you may not have control of your time right now, but you do have control over your energy. And what I mean by that is you can control energy allocation, where you are actually applying your energy during the course of the day. And if you put your energy towards things that are high leverage, towards the things that are actually moving you forward in the direction of your goals, you can accelerate meaningfully relative to where you are today. So if you choose to put your energy towards things that have 5, 10, 100x potential outcomes, that is a much better use of energy than putting your energy towards things that are 1x. They're, a simple sort of energy for money trade, if you will. And so the key there is identifying over the course of your week or month, what are the things that have the high upside within your day-to-day life. You may have to show up to the 20 Zoom meetings during the course of your week. You may have to do all of these calls, but that is very different than sitting down and thinking about, okay, well, I may have to do all those things during the day, but if there's this one project that I know has the opportunity to launch me forward, I need to make sure that I have the energy allocated towards that project so that I can really do my best work on that one thing that's going to vault me forward, whether that's in your own business or whether that's in your career, whatever track you're on. So the exercise that I lay out is what I call my energy calendar. It's this idea of, during the course of the week, color code your calendar after a day is over according to whether an activity created energy for you, mark it green, whether it was energy neutral, mark it yellow, or energy draining, mark it red. At the end of the week, if you do that, you will have a very clear sense of the activities that you are feeling pulled towards, that you are feeling create value and create energy in your life. Now, your goal after seeing that is to allocate and prioritize those energy creating tasks. Allocate towards those things that are going to be driving you forward, that are creating energy, creating value within your life.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who I was talking to before. It was a CEO from a company, and he was telling me that how he spends his time versus where he distributes his energy is not the same thing. And he said that there might be some times where he spends a lot of time on something, and maybe that'll give him, it'll drain his energy, but he might spend a little bit of time on something else that gives him energy. And he said that he very much thinks about the time that he uses versus the energy he has to contribute or the energy that he gets back as two very, very different things. So I love that you kind of break that apart. But in your case, even let's say you even do that. And I realize, well, these 20 Zoom meetings they're draining my energy every week. But I can't really control that. So then what do I do? Or are you saying you should take steps to try to minimize those energy
Over
drainers
periods of
from your
time,
calendar?
you should take steps to mitigate energy draining things. An example of that, very literally, with the Zoom meetings. I was in that position. I did hundreds of Zoom meetings. What I found was that a Zoom meeting might be very energy draining, but a walking phone call or Zoom meeting might be energy neutral or even energy creating, because I find I have energy when I walk. You can probably shift 3 to 5 of those towards being walking meetings. Some of them you have to be at your desk and you have to be on video. Some of them you probably don't if you really thought about it. That's just a simple example of a tiny intervention that can dramatically change the amount of energy you have at the end of your week. You take 10, 15, 20% of those energy draining events and you made them energy neutral or energy creating. And suddenly by the end of the week, you feel a lot different than you did before. And so it's thinking, it's questioning a little bit, how can I tweak some of these things that are energy draining and make them energy creating? An example from my own life right now, book launch, with my whole process around this book launch, there's a lot of things that I find energy draining about it. A lot of the boring, basic blocking and tackling and things that you have to do, I don't find energy creating. It's draining for me. But there are aspects, like the creative side of it, that are very energy creating for me. So the question I need to ask myself then is, how can I make this whole launch more creative? How can I actually make it feel fun? How can I make it feel easier in that same way?
Yeah. And I guess you can also balance some of the energy draining things with the creative things too, right? Because, even if you can't do anything with those Zoom meetings, I guess one strategy that you can implement is try to figure out how can you add some of those energy creating activities while you have maybe some of those energy draining activities and try to offset that. But even, it's funny, I was doing a workshop with a series of leaders and they had that same problem. They were Zoom meetings nonstop. And they acknowledged, they're like, yeah, we don't even need to be in a lot of these meetings. And I said, well, why don't you just say no? Why don't you just give your employees more accountability to make decisions? Because a lot of the Zoom meetings were just, we want to give you an update on what's going on. And these are things that could be done by an email. So I guess even if you're an employee at a company and you're doing 20, 25 Zoom meetings a week, you can push back a little bit and tell your team or tell your leaders and just say, hey, look, can we do this over an email? Or can I just show up for the first 5 or 10 minutes? And try to come up with some suggestions to help minimize your Zoom fatigue that so many people have been experiencing.
So say you are going to lead a meeting that is a weekly meeting. If you, before that weekly meeting, like an hour before it, just send out a 1-page memo and just say, if people want to get their time back, here's a memo that breaks down the entire thing. We can run through this in about 5 minutes on a call. Or if people feel like they sort of get it from this memo, we can give everyone their time back. I guarantee you most people will take you up on giving giving them their time back, because everyone feels that same thing. So if you take the initiative to do that, now you can set the tone, excuse me, around the entire thing and change the narrative within a company.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's
Yeah.
move on to the next one, because I know we only have a
Let's
couple
go
minutes
social
left.
wealth.
Which
So-
one do you want to go to?
Social wealth is all about your
Okay.
relationships and the both depth of the kind of core relationships and the breadth of your broader relationships within the world. We'll do a quick one here from an exercise standpoint. So this is one of my favorites. It's called Helped, Heard, or Hugged. And this is a framework really for depth and your deeper relationships. And what it is a simple question that you ask when someone comes to you with a problem. So whether it's your partner, whether it's a friend, and they're talking to you, venting to you, whatever it might be about an issue that they're facing, you literally ask, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged? And the question is asking, do you want advice? Do you want me to just listen? Or do you want touch? Do you just want me to kind of hear you and then give you a hug? This has solved so many problems that I've experienced in my own romantic relationship with my wife, because what I realized was my nature as a business person, as a man, is to be a fixer. And there's probably a lot of people on the call that have experienced this. You're a fixer. Yeah. You want to give the advice. You want to try to help. You want to fix the problem. And it would drive my wife nuts. All she really wanted was for me to listen and then to give her a hug. And doing that and realizing that and asking this question so that I could create the pattern in my own mind has really transformed our relationship in terms of the communication around any issues that come up. At least the first few times, yes. If you don't have the pattern created yet in a situation, like now I know, right? I don't need to ask my wife if she's, venting about something, family, work, whatever it might be. I know what she wants from me. But in a newer relationship, I would ask, like, do you want advice around this thing, or do you simply just want me to hear you?
Yeah. Yeah, the social one's really important because there's a lot of data out there, I think especially around Gen Z, saying that they're lonely, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're not prepared for the workplace. And this kind of goes back to one of the themes I mentioned earlier around these well-being programs. So for the social component, how do you see the interplay between your personal accountability and responsibility and the role that work plays? Because a lot of people do get some social connection from work, but at the same time, you can't only get your social connection from work. So how do you balance that responsibility between what the company should do for the social versus what you as an individual should be doing for the social?
I think this is almost entirely on you and personal, because everyone experiences social connection differently. I might be introverted and I might feel lonely if I don't spend time with one person in depth per week. But you might be extroverted and you might need to spend time with 20 people in depth per week in order to feel energized and feel like you are connected. So it is so personal that it's hard to kind of create a blanket corporate policy that actually connects with tons of different people. But as you said, I would argue this is the most important thing for people to consider and think about is fighting back against this loneliness epidemic that we are in. I mean, teenagers are spending 70% less time with their friends in person than they were 2 decades ago. 70%. And it's probably social media. People are sitting on their phones, right? And they feel like they're connected when in reality, they're not seeing the person sitting right in front of them. And it's a terrifying trend because we know the data is out there. Loneliness leads to higher risk of dementia, it leads to higher all-cause mortality, it leads to all of these enormous problems, especially as you get older in life. And so building those bonds, prioritizing that depth with that group of people is so, so important.
I mean, I remember when I was a kid and it was, you wanted to hang out with friends. It'd be like, all right, Mom, I'm going outside to play. And I used to live on a street in Granada Hills in Los Angeles, and we would all play street hockey, roller hockey outside. There was no phones. You barely had internet, dial-up at the time. We would play like Nintendo and Super Nintendo, but everyone was together and everyone was outside. And, as I mentioned, I have 2 kids, an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. And of course they are nowhere near phones. The only time my kids go on screens is if my daughter is playing chess, working on our chess homework. But yeah, it's totally crazy. Even now, you see people walking their dogs outside, and these are, we're talking about grown adults, and they're walking their dogs and they're staring down at their phones. And I've had people like almost walk into me because they don't look anymore. They're constantly at a screen. So it's crazy. I think how addictive some of these things are. And I love that you said it's almost always on you, because I think the assumption that a lot of people are putting out there is that, well, I don't need to exercise, I don't need to eat healthy, I don't need to make time for anything social, and I'm just going to show up to work and say, hey, I'm lonely, I'm disengaged at work, fix my problem. And my big frustration with a lot of organizations that are doing these programs is that they're not putting any accountability and responsibility on the employees. And so what happens when you inevitably leave that company? You feel like you can't handle the world. You're not prepared to exist. And I think it does require a little bit of tough love. It should be all on you. Make friends, go outside, join a church, go to a synagogue, whatever you got to do. You got to build those social connections. It's so important.
Yeah, and it's the same as any investment. I mean, I know we're running short on time. I think
Yeah.
with all of these types of wealth, one of the most important things that I get across and try to in the book is that the same principles as your financial investments apply to these other types of wealth. They compound over periods of time. So the investments that you make in your social wealth, in the relationships early in your life, compound over the years. Similarly, if you don't do anything, if you neglect those people close to you, they will not be there for you later in life. If you don't take the time to send that text to the person you love, to your family member, to that close friend, if you don't stay in touch, those relationships atrophy. We know that with money. We know that if we don't make those investments, we're not going to have the financial stuff there later. But with these other types of wealth, it's the exact same principle. With your physical health, if you don't do anything in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, your health will not be there for you in your 50s and 60s and beyond. And so that is really important. These don't exist on an infinite time horizon. You have to invest now, even if it's some tiny amount. Anything above zero compounds positively. So do the tiny little thing. You exist, your life happens across seasons. There's different seasons of life and different seasons where you will prioritize different things. But every one of these areas exists on a dimmer switch, not an on-off switch. You don't turn off your physical health. You don't turn off your social wealth during these periods of time. You need to focus on those high leverage systems that you can execute on. Even if you're not prioritizing it during a season, keep it on slightly with those couple of things, those couple actions, the couple texts you send, the one annual trip that you do with those friends, those little things that keep the spark there so that you can continue to thrive out years and years into the future.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. Remember, all of these episodes, you can simply find the full discussions by Googling either Jacob Morgan followed by the name of the guest, or by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and searching there, and you can listen to these full 60-minute conversations with all of these guests. You can also subscribe to the newsletter, greatleadership.substack.com. And if you have any feedback for me, please email me, jacob@thefutureorganization.com. I'll see you soon.